A quiet coastal village slept under the stars, but one young woman was wide awake. Ilara traced the faded lines on her grandfather's old sea chart, her heart beating a restless rhythm against the silence of her room. The map was mostly blank, its edges marked with a single, haunting phrase, the forgotten seas. Those empty spaces called to her, whispering of lost stories and vanished ships. To follow that call meant leaving the only home she had ever known, risking everything for a legacy she did not fully understand. As she packed her few belongings, the weight of her choice settled deep, a quiet promise of the vast and unknown world waiting beyond the horizon. By the end of our journey, you will discover the profound secrets hidden within the world's greatest maritime mysteries and the true power of stories that never truly die. What forgotten lore lies hidden in the blank spaces of your own life's map? Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? The deck of the Evening Star felt alien beneath her feet, a world of tarred rope and creaking timbers. Captain Lysa, a woman whose face was a map of past storms, had scoffed at the girl with the old chart. But Ilara's quiet offer to navigate by the stars, naming constellations her grandfather taught her, secured her passage. It was a practical bargain that shifted the crew's glances from pity to a guarded curiosity. She was no longer just a passenger, she was a participant, and her worth was now a question hanging in the salt air. A thrill battled a deep-seated fear within her as the last sight of the harbor's lanterns dissolved into the mist. The immense, dark expanse of the ocean was nothing like the safe, contained stories of her childhood. Every fiber of her being screamed to turn back, to seek the familiar solid ground. Instead, she clutched the worn edge of her map and decided, in that moment, to trust the old knowledge in her veins over the terror in her heart. This single choice, to stand firm when every instinct recoiled, was the true beginning of her voyage. The safety of the known world was gone, and there was no easy return. Then the first mate's call cut through the wind, his arm outstretched toward a shimmering disturbance on the water's surface ahead, a phenomenon that would demand every bit of courage she had just found. The water ahead did not simply shimmer, it blazed with a cold, living radiance, as if a piece of the Milky Way had fallen into the sea. A collective gasp went up from the crew, but Ilara's breath caught for a different reason. Her grandfather's cramped handwriting flashed in her mind, describing a place where the water itself held memory and light. He called it the Starlight Sargasso. Her voice cut through the awestruck silence, clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Captain," she said, turning to Lysa, "we must follow the dark channels within the glow. The light will try to lead us onto the reefs." The captain's eyes narrowed, a silent demand for an explanation Ilara did not have time to give. "Trust me," she pleaded, her gaze unwavering. "My grandfather's charts speak of this. It is a path, not a barrier." With a tense nod, Lysa barked orders to follow the girl's lead. Ilara's world shrank to the interplay of light and shadow on the water. The glowing currents swirled in mesmerizing patterns, beautiful and deeply hypnotic. She saw a sailor near the rail begin to lean over, his eyes wide and vacant, drawn by the siren song of the light. "Look at the stars," she commanded, her voice sharp as a whip crack. "Focus on the fixed points above, not the shifting lies below." She guided the Evening Star with a series of soft calls to the helmsman, port and starboard, her instructions painting an invisible safe passage through the incandescent trap. The ship groaned as it slid past jagged, barely submerged rocks that tore the glowing seaweed, sending up showers of spectral sparks. Each near miss was a heartbeat suspended, a testament to the accuracy of the forgotten knowledge she carried. When they finally slipped free of the Sargasso's grasp, the oppressive luminescence gave way to an absolute, unnerving calm. The crew, moments before gripped by fear, now looked at Alara with a new, hesitant respect. She had not just read a map, she had interpreted a living, breathing danger and led them through it. Captain Lysa offered a single, slow nod, the most significant gesture of trust Alara had received. The successful passage was a victory, but it was a costly one. It confirmed the legends were real, that the forgotten seas were a place of tangible marvel and mortal threat. Her secret was no longer entirely her own, and the value of her grandfather's chart had just multiplied 100-fold, making her and it a target for anyone who understood its power. As the adrenaline faded, a deep silence fell, and within it, carried on the still air, was the faint, melodic echo of a song no human voice could sing. That melody was not of the wind or the waves. It was a siren's call, a thread of pure enchantment, pulled straight from the oldest pages of her grandfather's lore. Alara's mind raced, connecting the haunting notes to the warnings she had read. She shouted over the growing murmur of the crew, her voice strained with urgency. Plug your ears, use wax from the lanterns, use cloth, use anything. Do not listen. It is a lure. The crew, still shaken from the Starlight Sargasso, moved with a frantic, terrified energy, tearing strips from their shirts and stuffing them deep into their ears. But Alara stood frozen at the rail, her own hands empty. She saw the danger, a physical force pulling at the men, but within that danger, she heard something else. A pattern, a repeating sequence of notes that felt less like a song and more like a map. It was a choice between safety and discovery, and the sea's secret was a siren song all its own. She made her decision. She would listen. As the crew's world fell into a muffled silence, Alara opened her senses completely to the call. The music wrapped around her mind, beautiful and agonizing. It was a pressure building behind her eyes, a sharp, insistent pain that threatened to split her skull. She gripped the wooden rail until her knuckles turned white, forcing herself to focus, to trace the melodic line as it rose and fell. She saw a young sailor, his eyes glazed, begin to climb onto the gunwale, drawn by the invisible thread. Captain Lysa, her own ears blocked, grabbed his belt and hauled him back, her gaze locking with Alara's, a silent question burning in her eyes. Alara could only nod, her face pale with strain, and point toward the bow, signaling that she was close to an answer. She pushed through the pain, deciphering the celestial code woven into the harmony. The song was not just a weapon, it was a signpost, and its final, sustained note hung in the air, pointing directly upward. With the siren's song charted in her mind, Alara looked to the night sky, where the constellation it indicated began to pulse with a soft, guiding light. Alara did not leave the deck that night. The chill seeped into her bones as she hunched over her grandfather's chart, her fingers tracing the newly illuminated lines of a constellation called the Mariner's Lyre. With each gentle pulse of its starlight, she called a soft correction to the helmsman, a slight adjustment to port or starboard. It was a slow, deliberate dance, guided by the heavens, a testament to a kind of navigation the crew had only heard in old songs. The trust she had earned in the Sargasso was a fragile currency, and with every hour they sailed further from known waters, she could feel it depleting. The dawn did not bring clarity, but a thick, swallowing fog that muffled the world into a featureless gray. Murmurs of discontent grew from the men, their voices low and anxious in the eerie silence. This was not the sea they knew. This was a blind journey into nothing. Captain Lysa approached, her own doubt a palpable presence. "The girl is leading us onto the rocks with her stories," a sailor hissed, his words hanging in the damp air. Ilara stood her ground, her hand resting on the chart. She met the captain's gaze, her voice quiet but unyielding. "The stars do not lie, Captain. We must hold this course." It was no longer a request, but a statement of fact. The entire venture now balanced on the accuracy of a forgotten melody and a map drawn from myth. Every creak of the ship, in the unsettling quiet, felt like a test of that faith. Then, as if the sea itself had heard the tension reach its peak, the mist began to thin. The gray veil parted, and there, stark against the brightening sky, was the jagged silhouette of an island no chart had ever recorded, and upon its highest peak, wreathed in the last tendrils of cloud, stood the crumbling ruins of a tower older than memory. The stone tower stood skeletal against the sky, its silence more profound than any sound. Ilara led the landing party up the crumbling steps, each footfall a blasphemy in the oppressive hush. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of ages, and the only light fell in sharp, dusty shafts, illuminating a breathtaking mural that wrapped around the circular wall. It depicted vast, elegant ships with sails of woven light, sailing not on water, but through a sea of stars. The crew muttered, their superstitions flaring in the unsettling quiet, but Ilara was transfixed. She ran her fingers over the painted constellations, recognizing the mariner's lyre from the night before. Her grandfather's stories were not just stories. They were history, pressing on a section of the mural where a painted star seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. She felt a hidden catch give way. A stone panel slid back with a gritty sigh, revealing a small, dark compartment. Nestled inside, gleaming as if it held captured moonlight, was a polished lens of starlight crystal. As she reached for it, a young sailor grabbed her wrist, his eyes wide with fear. He whispered that taking such a thing was an offense to the spirits of this place, a trespass that would not go unanswered. Ilara looked from his terrified face to the crystal, then to the star charts in her hand. To leave it was to remain in the dark. To take it was to unlock the map's true purpose. She gently pulled her arm free and lifted the lens from its ancient rest. The moment it settled in her palm, the murals seemed to brighten, the starships glowing with a soft, approving light. With the starlight crystal safely in her possession, a sudden tremor shook the island, and from the depths of a central lagoon, a colossal, ancient turtle began to rise. The ancient turtle was a living island, its shell a landscape of moss and weathered stone. It rose from the lagoon with a silence that was more intimidating than any roar, a wall of primordial life that completely blocked their retreat to the longboat. The crew froze, their hands instinctively reaching for belaying pins and knives. But Alara stepped forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. Force was not an option here. This was a guardian, not a monster. Her mind raced back to the murals in the tower, to the ships sailing the starry void. She raised the starlight crystal, her hands trembling only slightly. Focusing her will, she thought of the mariner's lyre, of the specific pattern of stars that had guided them here. A soft beam of light erupted from the lens, not a weapon, but a projector. It painted a perfect, shimmering replica of the constellation directly onto the turtle's massive, dark shell. The creature went utterly still. Its great head, larger than a barrel, turned slowly, one ancient eye regarding the glowing stars on its own back. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. This was a test of her interpretation. Had she understood the language of this place, or was she merely decorating a giant's armor before it swatted them away? Then, with a deep, resonant sigh that vibrated through the very ground, the turtle's head dipped in a gesture that could only be acknowledgement. It turned with a slow, deliberate grace and began to slide back into the dark water, the starry pattern fading from its shell as it submerged. The path was clear. Where the guardian had been, a single iridescent scale floated on the water's surface, catching the light with a soft, internal fire. Alara waded in and carefully retrieved it. It was warm to the touch, and as she held it in her palm alongside the crystal, it began to pulse with a gentle, rhythmic light. The crew's fearful tension dissolved into a hushed, reverent awe. They had witnessed a conversation, not a conflict. Alara had not challenged the guardian. She had spoken to it in a language it understood, proving that their intent was one of respect. This victory was not one of strength, but of wisdom. It set a new precedent for their entire quest. The dangers of the forgotten seas would not be overcome by force, but by understanding their hidden rules. As their longboat pulled away from the island and back toward the evening star, the turtle's scale in Alara's hand glowed more insistently. She held it up, and its light seemed to sharpen, pointing like a compass needle away from the setting sun, deeper into the uncharted expanse. Their course was no longer a mystery. The guardian had not just let them pass, it had given them a guide. The ocean floor dissolved into a desert of swirling, luminous sand. It was a place where the very geography was a lie, where safe channels opened and closed with the whim of the currents. Alara stood at the bow, the lead line, a constant, heavy extension of her arm. Her calls to the helmsman became the ship's only rhythm, a litany of depth and direction that cut through the unnerving silence. Starboard 5 fathoms, port 3, midships, shallow. Each reading was a temporary truth, a fleeting path through an ever-changing maze. The crew's initial awe at the glowing seabed quickly curdled into a grinding fatigue. Every adjusted sail, every turn of the wheel was a battle against an enemy that was the sea itself. Morale, once buoyed by their earlier successes, began to seep away into the shifting sands below. The fear was no longer of a single, monstrous creature, but of a slow, inexorable defeat by a landscape that refused to be mapped. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the swirling sands in deep violets and eerie golds, Captain Lysa approached. "We should drop anchor, wait for daylight," she stated, her voice rough with her own exhaustion. Alara shook her head, her eyes never leaving the water. "If we stop, Captain, The path will be gone by morning. This sea does not reward hesitation. It was a terrible gamble, to navigate a blind channel in utter darkness, guided only by the ghostly glow from below and the fragile thread of her own concentration. But to stop was to be trapped. Her decision to push onward through the night was a testament to a new kind of resolve, one forged not in a moment of crisis, but in the relentless grind of endurance. The crew grumbled, their movements becoming sluggish with weariness, but they obeyed. The stakes were no longer about discovery, but survival itself. The physical and mental strength of every soul aboard was the currency being spent, and the shifting sea was a pitiless creditor. For hours, the only sounds were the whisper of the sand below and Alara's hoarse, unwavering voice painting a safe passage in the dark. Just as dawn broke, its first rays painting the luminous sands with a wash of fiery gold, the turbulent channels began to slow. The swirling patterns settled, the underwater dunes stabilized, and a single, clear waterway emerged ahead, pointing like an arrow toward a distant, storm-wreathed horizon. The storm did not gather, it simply arrived. One moment, the horizon was a distant line. The next, it was a churning wall of black cloud and green lightning, a maelstrom that tore the very sky. This was the Sky Wrath, a name from her grandfather's margins given terrifying, breathing form. The wind screamed like a thing alive, and the sea rose in mountains of black water. Alara did not think. She scrambled onto the heaving deck, the starlight crystal clutched in both hands. As lightning fractured the sky, she thrust the lens upward, not in defiance, but in desperate communion. She did not command the storm to cease. She asked the hidden stars above the cloud rack for their protection. A thin, unwavering beam of silver light lanced from the crystal, piercing the oppressive gloom. It did not calm the tempest. Instead, it drew a circle of impossible tranquility around the evening star, a pocket of calm air while chaos roared just a few yards beyond the rail. The ship was safe, but trapped. Outside their fragile sanctuary, the ocean was a hell of white water and howling wind. The crew fought with the desperate strength of those staring into the abyss, wrestling with ropes turned to iron bars, their shouts torn away by the gale. They battled to keep the ship from being spun into the raging wall of the storm, every muscle straining against the elemental fury. Alara stood at the center of it all, a fixed point in the madness. She braced herself against the mainmast, her entire being focused on the crystal. Each bolt of lightning that struck the water outside their circle sent a jolt of psychic feedback through her, a searing pain behind her eyes. Spray from the towering waves lashed her face, and the deck pitched violently at the very edge of their calm eye. One misstep, one faltering of her concentration, and she would be flung into the maelstrom. She held fast, her choice to stand, exposed, becoming a silent pact with the crew. She would maintain the shield if they could keep the ship steady. It was a brutal, shared ordeal that escalated their quest beyond mere exploration. They were no longer just visitors in the forgotten seas. They were participants in a living system of immense power, forces that could be bargained with but never truly mastered. The storm's fury was not mindless. It was a test of will and worth. Then, as swiftly as it had come, the Sky Wrath departed. The winds faded to a whisper. The waves subsided into a gentle, oily swell. The sudden silence was as shocking as the noise had been. Exhausted, trembling from the effort, Alara lowered the crystal, The sea around them had been scoured clean, the water a deep, clear blue. And there, directly ahead where only empty ocean should have been, lay a massive, floating island of crystalline ice, its peaks catching the sun in a dazzling, silent welcome. The crystalline ice island was a fortress of silence, its frozen shores groaning softly as the evening star moored in a sheltered cove. Before them stretched a forest, unlike any Alara had ever seen, a grove of trees whose trunks and branches were sculpted from solid, blue-tinged ice. This was the Icewood Grove, a place of breathtaking and unsettling beauty. A soft, ethereal glow pulsed from its very heart, a rhythmic beacon that cut through the deep, unnatural quiet. Leading a small party ashore, Alara felt the cold as a physical assault, a biting presence that sought to steal both warmth and will. Every crunch of their boots on the frost was a gunshot in the stillness, and the eerie perfection of the frozen trees made them feel like intruders in a sacred, sleeping space. The deeper they went, the more the silence pressed in, a psychological weight that amplified the frantic beating of their own hearts. The source of the glow was a single, magnificent tree at the grove's center, its trunk clear as glass and its branches radiating a gentle, living light. This was the heartwood, and tangled within its labyrinth of glowing roots was the water-stained leather cover of a ship's logbook. The sight sent a jolt through Alara. It was the documented proof of those who had come before, a direct link to the legendary lost expedition of the vessel known as the Dawn Chaser. To retrieve it, she would have to work with painstaking care, her numb fingers carefully untangling each frozen root without snapping a single one. It was a slow, deliberate act of reverence, a choice to honor this place rather than plunder it. The crew watched, their breath pluming in the air, understanding that this was not a treasure hunt, but a recovery. When the logbook finally came free, its weight in her hands felt immense. The quest was no longer based on second-hand charts and family stories. They now held a first-hand account, a voice from the past that would give context to every danger they had faced and every mystery that lay ahead. As she gently pried open the stiff, waterlogged cover, a single folded parchment slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the ice. Unfolding, it revealed a meticulously sketched map, its routes drawn in an ink that still shimmered with a faint, captured light, leading the eye directly to a location marked with 3 haunting words: the Sundered Sea. The Sundered Sea was a place of visible, grinding conflict. The waters did not blend but clashed, a warm, fresh river flowing stubbornly atop a deep, cold, salt-heavy ocean. Their meeting was a permanent seam of rippling tension, a surface of shimmering contradictions that made the ship groan in protest. Navigating this schism required a new kind of seamanship. Alara, the logbook open in her salt-stung hands, called out a continuous stream of adjustments. More sail to catch the upper current, less rudder to avoid fighting the powerful underflow. Every command felt wrong, a violation of every sailing instinct the helmsman possessed. To turn into a wave here was to invite the conflicting layers to grip the hull and twist it in opposing directions. The sound of stressed timbers became a constant, terrifying companion. Alara's choice was absolute. She silenced her own doubt and trusted the dead mariner's handwritten notes, even when they demanded a course that seemed to head directly into a churning vortex of clashing waters. This was no longer about reading stars or calming spirits. It was a brutal test of physics and faith. where a single miscalculation would not merely strand them, but splinter their only refuge into driftwood. The crew's movements became synchronized acts of precision, their faces tight with concentration as they balanced the ship on a knife's edge between two seas. For hours, they danced this dangerous ballet, the fate of the evening star resting on the accuracy of a century-old text and a young woman's unwavering voice. Then, with one final, shuddering lurch, the conflicting pressures released. The groaning ceased, the rippling seam faded behind them, and their vessel slid forward into a vast, circular expanse of water, so still it felt like polished black glass. And there, resting silently at its heart, was a city of ships, their masts a petrified forest against the sky, all lashed together into a single, permanent community, adrift in the endless ocean. The city of ships was not a graveyard, but a living, breathing tapestry woven from the hulls of countless vessels. As Alara's longboat approached, faces appeared at railings and over bulwarks, their expressions not of suspicion, but of a quiet, weary curiosity. They were welcomed aboard with silent gestures, their boots landing on a deck that was a mosaic of different woods and ages, all fused into a single, stable community. The air hummed with the low sounds of mending and quiet conversation, a stark contrast to the violent seas they had just escaped. Alara did not pause to marvel. She moved with a singular purpose, asking for their elder until she was guided to a woman seated near a central, sheltered hearth, her hands busy with a length of knotted rope. This was Captain Icewood, her face a landscape of deep peace and deeper loss. Alara sat, the logbook of the dawn chaser resting between them like an offering. She spoke of her grandfather's charts, of the Starlight Sargasso and the Icewood grove, of the songs and the storms. Icewood listened, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, and when Alara finished, the old captain simply nodded. "Your path was not an accident," she said, her voice soft as sea-worn stone. "Your grandfather sailed with us. He was one of our finest stargazers before the call of the world he left behind drew him home. He left to ensure his knowledge would not die with us." The revelation struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. This was not just a quest for forgotten lore. It was the completion of a family legacy, a circle she had unknowingly been walking her entire life. The community around her was not just a refuge, it was her inheritance. A profound sense of belonging washed over her, so powerful it threatened to pull her under. Here was a place of rest, of shared understanding, where the weight of her strange knowledge would be a comfort, not a burden. The temptation to lay down her map and stay was immense, a siren song more potent than any she had faced. But as she looked at the faces of these mariners who had chosen to stop, she knew with a sudden, aching clarity that her journey was not meant to end here. Her grandfather had left for a reason. He had passed the map to her for a reason. To stay would be to accept a beautiful ending, but it would mean abandoning the story he had entrusted her to finish. "I cannot stay," she said, her voice thick with emotion but unwavering. "I have to see it through." Captain Icewood's smile was one of deep, sorrowful respect. She pressed a small, brass compass into Alara's hand. Its face had no markings for north or south. "This does not find a direction," Icewood explained. "It finds a truth. Trust it when all other guides fail." As the evening star pulled away from the floating city, its sails catching a newfound wind. Alara looked down at the gift in her palm. The needle, which had been spinning lazily, abruptly snapped to a hard stop, pointing like an accusing finger toward a thin, dark line of cloud gathering on the distant horizon. The dark line on the horizon was not a storm, but a stillness. The compass in Alara's hand grew cold. Its needle locked fast as the waters around the evening star turned to a thick, ink-black soup. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the ship's timbers, a sound felt more in the bones than heard by the ears. Then the sea began to rise. A mountain of scaled flesh, dark as a midnight abyss, broke the surface. It was the Leviathan, a creature of living legend, and its single, ancient eye, large as a shield, fixed upon their vessel. Panic seized the crew. Swords were drawn, a futile gesture against a being that could crush their ship with a flick of its tail. Terror was a physical force, choking the air from their lungs, but Alara did not reach for the starlight crystal. Her mind, honed by the trials behind them, understood this was not a challenge. It was a test of a different kind. Her hand went to the pouch at her belt, retrieving the iridescent scale gifted by the island's guardian. It pulsed with a warm, gentle light in her palm. She did not brandish it like a weapon. She simply held it aloft, an offering of remembered peace. The scale's soft glow fell upon the Leviathan's eye. The deep hum shifted in tone, the vibration losing its threatening edge. The colossal creature let out a sigh that misted the air, a sound of ancient recognition. Its immense head, which could have shattered their masts, instead dipped in a slow, almost graceful nod. Then it slid beneath the black water, leaving a whirlpool in its wake. For a long moment, there was only stunned silence. Then the Leviathan surfaced again, much closer, its movement startlingly gentle. With the barest nudge of its snout, it pushed a small, watertight chest of dark, salt-cured wood toward the ship's hull, before turning and vanishing into the deep, leaving no trace but the fading hum. The crew hauled the chest aboard, their hands trembling not with fear, but with a reverent awe. They had expected a battle and had been given a gift. Alara's choice to respond with a token of past respect had transformed a moment of certain doom into a profound exchange. This was the true law of the forgotten seas. Force was met with force, but understanding was met with legacy. When they pried open the chest, there was no gold, no jewels. Instead, they found a set of master charts, drawn on a material that felt like cured sea silk. The details were breathtaking, depicting ocean currents that flowed underground and atmospheric rivers that danced between the stars. These were not just maps. They were the accumulated wisdom of every mariner who had successfully navigated these waters, a legacy entrusted to those who proved themselves worthy. And at the very edge of the finest chart, where the known world fell away into a swirl of artists' clouds and celestial markers, was a single, elegantly scripted label that made Alara's heart stand still. It read, "The World's End." The master charts led them to the edge of everything. The sea did not simply stop. It cascaded over a silent, colossal cliff, a waterfall of impossible scale, where the ocean poured upward into the starry void above. The roar was a physical pressure, a vibration that threatened to shake the very thoughts from their minds. The crew stared, their faces etched with a primal terror, certain they were witnessing the world's end. Alara clung to the ship's wheel, her eyes not on the abyss, but on the intricate celestial puzzle etched into its spokes. a final lock on a door of water and sky. Her fingers traced the constellations, aligning the carved stars with their living counterparts in the heavens. Each click of a dial into place was a prayer against the deafening roar, a battle fought in the quiet space behind her eyes. The crew's fear was a tangible force, their shouts of protest lost in the thunder. They saw madness in her calm focus. With a final deep breath, Alara made the last alignment. A soft chime resonated from the wheel, a sound that cut cleanly through the chaos. For a single heart-stopping moment, the upward torrent of the waterfall stuttered, hesitated, and then reversed its flow, pulling back to reveal a yawning, dark cavern hidden behind the curtain of water. The path was open. Without a word, her hands steady on the wheel, Alara steered the Evening Star forward. It was not a command anyone gave. It was a choice she embodied, a leap of faith that accepted the old stories as her only compass. The ship surged into the opening, the roar of the falls a final, furious protest at their backs. Then, as they passed through the veil of water, the roar faded into a profound silence, and they found themselves sailing not on water, but on a sea of liquid starlight. The Sea of Starlight was a breath held in wonder. Gone was the familiar pitch and groan of a wooden ship on a living ocean. The Evening Star now glided in absolute silence across a surface of liquid radiance, its wake spreading in soft, phosphorescent ripples. The very air hummed with a quiet, celestial music. It was a peace so profound it felt like a different state of being. The crew, their faces etched with the memory of storms and sea monsters, simply stood at the rails, their postures slack with a relief that was almost painful. They had not found an end, but a beginning. In this sacred calm, Alara felt a new connection awaken. The starlight crystal in her hand began to pulse in time with the gentle light of the sea, a soft, warm vibration that traveled up her arm. She closed her eyes, and an idea, quiet and certain, bloomed in her mind. She released the ship's wheel and walked to the bow, extending the crystal over the glowing expanse. She did not command the vessel. She simply thought a forward motion, of a gentle turn, and the Evening Star responded, sliding through the starlight as if guided by an invisible hand. It was navigation by pure intent, a silent conversation between the traveler and the path itself. This was the reward for their perseverance, a mode of travel that required no straining muscles or shouted orders, only a quiet harmony with the world they had worked so hard to reach. Yet, within that profound peace, a new tension grew. The master charts were useless here, their carefully drawn lines ending at the waterfall's edge. They had reached a place beyond all maps. Every choice now was a step into the absolute unknown. Alara pushed aside her own disbelief and the creeping anxiety about their final destination. She focused on the crystal's resonant hum, letting its gentle pull become her only compass. She made the decision to follow a feeling, a subtle tug in her spirit that seemed to draw them toward the sea's heart. It was a leap of faith that trusted intuition over knowledge, feeling over fact. The stakes had transformed completely. The struggle for survival was over, replaced by the immense weight of discovery. They were guests in the most hallowed space of the forgotten seas, and whatever secret lay at its core would redefine everything they understood about the world. Their intuitive path did not wander. It drew them unerringly toward the center of that vast, glowing sea, where a sight awaited them that stole the very breath from their lungs. A single tree, more immense than any mountain, rose from the starlight. Its trunk and branches were not wood, but woven constellations, a tapestry of living galaxies. Its roots drank from the luminous sea and cradled within its highest branches, pulsing with a slow, patient rhythm, was a single, dormant light that held the silence of creation within it. The compacted starlight felt solid and cool beneath her boots as Alara stepped onto the small island at the base of the impossible tree. The air itself thrummed with a silent, waiting knowledge. Compelled by a force deeper than curiosity, she reached out and pressed her palm flat against the bark that was woven from constellations. Instantly, the universe erupted inside her mind. She was not just Alara and Amor. She was 1,000 sailors on 1,000 decks, feeling the first crack of a mast in a gale, the desperate grip on a splintered rail, the final, gasping breath as a ship slid beneath the waves. She was the navigator who misread a star, and the captain who made a brave choice that led to a different kind of loss. Every fear, every moment of courage, every whispered name for a loved one left on a distant shore, it all poured into her, a torrent of human experience that threatened to wash her own self away. The weight of so many endings was a crushing pressure, an ocean of memory determined to pull her under and add her own story to its infinite collection. Her own name began to fray at the edges, her memories of the coastal village blurring beneath the onslaught of a million other sunsets. This was the tree's sacred, terrible purpose. It was a living library, a guardian against the final silence of oblivion, and it preserved these stories by asking a visitor to share their burden. In the roaring chaos of shared history, a single, quiet image fought its way to the surface. It was the scent of pipe smoke in a warm room, the feel of a rough, kind hand on her small head, the patient sound of her grandfather's voice, tracing a constellation on a painted ceiling. She clung to that memory, wrapping it around her mind like a lifeline. She did not push the other stories away. Instead, she used his love as an anchor, a fixed point that allowed her to observe the flood without drowning in it. She let the memories flow past her, acknowledging their pain and their beauty without letting them become her own. It was the most difficult navigation of her life, a journey inward through a storm of souls. By holding fast to the one story that was uniquely hers, she found she could walk through the library without becoming a permanent part of its collection. Her singular identity, forged from a specific love and a specific purpose, became the key. Moving with deliberate slowness, she followed the anchor of her grandfather's memory deeper into the shared consciousness, past the crashing waves of collective fear, and into a profound, central calm. And there, suspended in the heart of the constellation tree, pulsed a single, bright seed of pure, condensed light. It held the quiet essence of all the lost lore, not as an overwhelming flood of sensation, but as a silent, profound understanding waiting to be received. The seed hung before her, a silent, condensed universe of memory. To take it was not a theft, but an acceptance. It was an offer to become a living library, to carry the weight of every lost sailor's final thought and every forgotten ship's true name within her own spirit. The peace of her old life, the quiet anonymity of the coastal village, rose in her mind like a comforting ghost. It promised a return to simple things, to a world where her greatest worry was the day's catch or the evening's fire. But that ghost had no substance, no warmth compared to the vibrant, aching truth of the stories now swirling around her. A normal life would be a beautiful cage, and she had already sailed too far to ever fit inside its walls again. Her choice was not made in a grand shout, but in a quiet, internal surrender. She opened her hands, her heart, and her will. "I accept this," she whispered into the humming silence. The seed drifted forward and touched the starlight crystal in her palm. There was no flash, no explosion, only a deep, resonant merging as the two became one. The crystal warmed, its light softening from a cold silver to a gentle, living gold that pulsed in time with her own heartbeat. A profound peace flooded her, not the absence of struggle, but the certainty of place. She was no longer just Alara from the village. She was the keeper. The final, internal conflict dissolved, replaced by a purpose so vast, it left no room for regret. This was the climax of her long journey, the moment her personal search for answers transformed into a lifelong vow of guardianship. The fate of these world's greatest stories was no longer an abstract concept. It was a duty woven into her very being, the new and eternal definition of her life's meaning. As the seed completed its union with her, the entire Sea of Starlight responded. The liquid light beneath their ship began to glow with a brighter, friendlier radiance. Above, the immense branches of the Constellation tree swayed in a silent, cosmic dance, their movements weaving a solid pathway of shimmering light that stretched out across the glowing sea, pointing the way back home. The path home was a river of light, its current flowing with a gentle certainty that guided the evening star back through the cavern behind the falls. As their stern cleared the opening, the colossal waterfall thundered back into place, sealing the way behind them with a finality that felt less like an ending and more like a promise. The sea they now sailed was the one they knew, yet it felt utterly transformed. Winds filled their sails without being summoned, and favorable currents cradled their hull, carrying them forward with a serene swiftness that made their earlier struggles feel like a distant, half-remembered dream. The physical journey was almost effortless, a gift from the sea itself, but a new tension grew within Alara's heart, a quiet anxiety about the world that lay ahead. How would her quiet village, a place concerned with tides and nets, receive the stories she now carried? Her first decision as the keeper was a simple one, born of loyalty. She would see Captain Lysa and every member of the crew safely home, their bravery honored and their lives returned to them. This was her duty, a final act for the woman she had been before the Constellation tree. The stakes had shifted completely. The challenge was no longer navigating treacherous waters, but navigating the return of a truth so vast it could reshape the world. The familiar sight of their home coastline appeared on the horizon, a smudge of green and brown against the blue, but Alara knew her village was no longer her final destination. It was merely her first port of call. The cheers from the dock were a warm, distant wave, but Alara stood motionless on the deck of the Evening Star, her hand resting on the sun-warmed rail. Captain Lysa approached, her usual stern expression softened by a shared understanding that needed no words. They spoke in quiet tones, a farewell not of goodbye, but of release. The crew, once strangers bound by shared fear, now embraced her as family before stepping onto the solid ground they had fought so hard to regain, each one carrying a fragment of the incredible tale back to the world. Alara watched them melt into the joyful crowd, their laughter a stark contrast to the profound silence now living within her. She was home, yet she had never felt so far from it. The cozy rhythm of the village, the smell of baking bread and mending nets, felt like a story about someone else, a life that could no longer contain the ocean of memories she now carried. The internal conflict was a quiet ache, a pull between the profound comfort of the known and the undeniable call of a destiny she had willingly accepted. Her old life was a safe harbor, but her spirit was a vessel built for deeper waters. The choice was clear, yet it cost her a piece of her heart. She would not stay. Gathering her few belongings, she felt the weight of the merged crystal against her chest, its gentle pulse a constant reminder of her vow. She was no longer a seeker of lost lore. She was its keeper, and a story untold was a story that risked being lost forever. Her happiness, she realized, was not found in the peaceful solitude of guarding these secrets, but in the act of sharing them, in offering their wisdom to other restless hearts. With a final, long look at the village lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk, she turned her back on the shore. Her hands settled on the ship's wheel, and the unmarked compass in her pocket grew warm. Its needle, which sought truth over direction, swung decisively away from the safety of the land, pointing her toward the first of many new horizons. The evening star caught the evening breeze, its sails filling as it carved a path back into the waiting embrace of the open sea. The city of Veridan's gate smelled of dust and salt-rotted rope, a place where ambition came to be forgotten. Ilara found the boy in the port library's deepest corner, hunched over a blank sheet of vellum. His name was Leo, and the light in his eyes had been smothered by the tedious work of copying maps for merchants who cared only for trade winds and profit. He did not look up when she approached, his shoulders slumped in a posture of profound surrender. Her first act as story keeper was not a grand pronouncement, but a quiet offering. She sat beside him and began to speak of a sea that remembered the stars. She told him of the Starlight Sargasso, of water that glowed with a cold, living fire, and of the hidden channels one had to follow to survive its mesmerizing beauty. As her words wove through the dusty air, the starlight crystal resting against her chest responded. It cast a soft, shimmering haze above the table, a faint projection of swirling luminescence that danced over his blank parchment. For the first time, Leo looked up. His cynicism was a wall, but her story was a quiet, persistent tide. She spoke not of monsters or treasure, but of a path seen only by those who trusted older truths, of a danger that was also a guide. The conflict here was silent, a battle against the apathy that had settled in his heart. She chose this story of beauty and celestial navigation deliberately, a gentle introduction to a world far wider than the one his charts depicted. The stake was not a life or a ship, but something just as fragile, the spark of curiosity in a single human spirit. She watched his eyes, once dull with resignation, begin to track the shimmering patterns on the page. A slow, hesitant wonder dawned on his face as the phantom light traced the safe passage through the glowing trap. His hand, which had been still for so long, twitched as if to reach for a pen. The story was doing its work, not by demanding belief, but by inviting it, rekindling a sense of marvel he thought he had lost forever. Seeing that newfound light reflected in his gaze, Ilara understood the true shape of her mission. Her journey across the forgotten seas had been the prologue. This the awakening of another's dream, was the story she was meant to live. She rose silently, leaving the ghost of a starry sea glowing on his desk as she stepped back into the bustling port, her own compass already turning toward the next heart in need of a story. The small ship was her sanctuary, and her voice. Alara named it the Storyteller, a single-masted vessel built for agility and quiet passage into forgotten coves and bustling harbors alike. Its hold carried no spices or silks, only provisions and the profound, living library of her own memory. Her purpose was a quiet rebellion against the mundane. She did not seek buyers for goods, but listeners for tales, seeking out those whose eyes held a particular kind of hunger, a longing for a world larger than the one they knew. In a smoky tavern in a northern port, she found a shipwright whose hands were skilled, but whose spirit was weary from building only for profit. She sat with him and did not speak of ship designs, but of the sky wrath, of the terrifying, beautiful fury of a storm that tested a crew's will to its absolute limit. She described the way the wind screamed, not as a monster, but as a force of pure, untamed nature, and how the crew's shared struggle forged a bond stronger than any iron nail. She spoke of the profound calm that followed, a peace earned through endurance. The shipwright listened, his gaze distant, and when she finished, he nodded slowly. The next day, he began carving a new figurehead, not of a stern warrior, but of a woman facing a storm with a calm expression, a private tribute to a story that had reminded him why he loved the sea in the first place. This was the consequence of her work. A reputation began to precede her, not as a merchant or an explorer, but as a wandering bard of the sea, a living bridge between the world of docks and duties and the magical, forgotten one she represented. Children would point as she walked through a market, whispering that she carried Starlight in her pocket. The external challenge was a wall of skepticism. Hardened sailors in port towns would scoff at the woman who traded in stories, their laughter a brittle sound. What use is a story when the nets are empty, they would ask. Her internal challenge was a deep, persistent loneliness. The storyteller was often a solitary light on a dark sea, and the weight of the memories she carried was a burden she could never fully share. Yet, in her solitude, she made a crucial decision. She chose to embrace the quiet, to see it not as an emptiness, but as the fertile ground where stories could grow. She found companionship not in a crew, but in the tales themselves, and in the fleeting, profound connections she forged with each listener. The stakes of her voyage were intangible but immense, the preservation of wonder itself. Every story told was a victory, a single, shimmering thread woven back into the tapestry of a world prone to forgetfulness and despair. It was a battle against the slow dimming of imagination. In every port, a new listener awaited, their quiet longing a beacon only she could see, and the unmarked compass of truth in her pocket always grew warm, pointing her toward the heart that needed her next. The city of Ethelgard was slowly being swallowed by a persistent, colorless gloom. It was not a storm, but a deep spiritual exhaustion that leached the vibrancy from its stones and the hope from its people. Alara found the old Ropemaker in a dusty workshop, his hands still and listless on a half-finished coil. His name was Kale, and he had not seen the point in creating anything for a very long time. The grayness outside had seeped into his soul. Alara did not offer empty comfort. She sat on a stool beside him and began to speak of a different kind of city, one not of stone, but of wood and fellowship. She told him of the flotilla of memories, the incredible community of ships lashed together in the heart of the Sundered Sea, a place where mariners from every corner of the world had chosen connection over solitude. She described how they shared their skills, mending sails and spirits with equal care, how their laughter echoed across the water, a defiant light against the vast, unknown ocean. She spoke of Captain Icewood, a woman who had lost everything, only to find a new kind of family in that floating haven. The story was not about treasure or monsters, but about the profound human act of building a home where one was never supposed to exist. Cale listened, his eyes fixed on the dusty floor, but as Alara wove the tale of shared purpose and resilience, a subtle shift occurred. The conflict here was silent, a battle against the apathy that had choked the city's spirit. Her choice of this particular story was a deliberate antidote to the isolation Ethelgard felt, a reminder that community could be forged even in the most unlikely of places. A slow, determined light kindled in Cale's eyes. He stood, his old bones protesting, and went to a chest in the corner. From it, he pulled out bundles of old rope, saved from a lifetime of work, but in colors he had long forgotten, deep blues, sun-bleached whites, and rich, earthy browns. He did not speak. He simply began to work, his hands moving with a purpose they had not known in years. He did not make rope. He began to weave. For days he worked, and the people of Ethelgard, drawn by the strange rhythmic sound, gathered to watch. He wove a magnificent tapestry, a vast depiction of the flotilla of memories. In it, you could see the intricate mosaic of different ship decks, the shared hearths glowing with warmth, and the faces of sailors looking not out to an empty horizon, but toward one another. When it was finished, the entire community helped him hang the colossal weaving in the town square. As the tapestry settled against the gray stone, something miraculous happened. The vibrant colors of the woven ships seemed to bleed into the very air. The pervasive gray pall began to thin, then lift, as if the story itself was pulling the despair up and away. Sunlight, true and warm, broke through the clouds for the first time in a generation, striking the tapestry and setting its colors ablaze. The people looked around at their city, now bathed in light and color, and their quiet murmurs turned to joyful conversation. They turned to Alara, their faces full of a newfound hope, and asked for another story. She smiled, feeling the gentle pulse of the crystal against her chest, and knew exactly which tale to share next, the story of the guardian of the atoll. The hall of the Grand University was a fortress of cold marble and colder reason. Alara stood before a sea of skeptical faces, her simple travelers' clothes a stark contrast to the scholars' rich robes. The most prominent among them, a man named Alaric, dismissed her accounts with a wave of his hand. "These are pretty fictions," he declared, "the desperate inventions of sailors lost to sun and solitude." The room murmured its agreement. Alara felt the weight of their collective doubt, a pressure as tangible as the deep ocean. She did not raise her voice in argument. Instead, she reached into her pack and placed two objects on the polished oak table between them. First came the ship's log from the Icewood grove, its leather cover still stiff with ancient cold, the pages water stained and filled with a frantic, fading script. Then she laid the Leviathan's scale beside it, the iridescent plate, larger than her hand, pulsed with a soft, internal rhythm, casting shifting patterns of captured sea light onto the marble floor. The scholarly murmurs ceased. Alaric's eyes, once full of condescending certainty, were now locked on the physical proof before him. He could dismiss a story, but he could not dismiss the chill emanating from the logbook or the impossible, living light of the scale. His rational mind, trained to dissect and doubt, was confronted with artifacts that defied simple explanation. Alara did not demand he believe her. She simply asked him to explain the evidence. How could a fantasy produce a logbook that detailed celestial patterns not recognized by modern astronomy? What natural phenomenon could account for a material that generated its own warmth and light? A material unknown to any geological record. The conflict was no longer a battle of words, but a quiet, internal war within the scholar himself. His entire world view, built on a foundation of empirical data and documented history, was being challenged not by wild claims, but by relics that asked more questions than his science could answer. Alara's choice to engage with respect and tangible evidence transformed the confrontation. She demonstrated that the lore of the forgotten seas was not a matter of blind faith, but a different kind of knowledge, one that could withstand scrutiny if the scrutiny was open-minded. The stake was immense, the acceptance of her life's work by the gatekeepers of formal knowledge. If she could win over this bastion of skepticism, the stories would gain a credibility that would echo through libraries and universities for centuries, preserving them not just as campfire tales, but as a legitimate, if mysterious, part of the world's history. Alaric slowly reached out, his fingers hesitating before touching the scale. A profound shift occurred in his expression, the crumbling of a wall he had not known he had built. Humbled by the silent testimony of these artifacts, he looked at Alara not as a teller of tales, but as a bearer of a lost chronicle. He became her first scribe, and together they began the monumental task of compiling the first official written record of the forgotten seas, translating wonder into words for a world hungry for truth it had forgotten how to see. The coastal village of Shearwater clung to the cliffs like a barnacle, its existence defined by the sea's sudden fury. Without warning, the sky would turn to bruised purple and green, and squalls would descend to trap its fishing fleet. Ilara found the storm's singer in a small stone hut at the village's edge, where the wind's cry was loudest. The old woman, named Lyra, did not look up from her cold hearth. "My songs are just noise to the wind now," she whispered, her voice rough with disuse. "They have no strength left." The villagers still left offerings of fish and woven grass at her door, a heartbreaking testament to a faith she could no longer feel. Ilara did not offer empty praise. She sat on the stone floor and began to speak of a storm that was not a monster, but a test of will. She told Lyra of the sky wrath, of the screaming wind and the waves that rose like black mountains, and of the choice to raise the starlight crystal, not as a weapon to fight the gale, but as a plea to find a pocket of peace within its heart. It was not about silencing the storm, Ilara explained, but about listening to its chaotic music and finding the one still note you could hold on to. She described the shared ordeal of the crew, their muscles straining not against the sea, but against their own terror, and how her own role was simply to be a fixed point in the madness. The conflict here was not just the weather, but the crushing weight of a failed tradition, and the very real danger that threatened every family in Shearwater. Ilara's choice was a deliberate act of trust. She did not offer to sing the songs for Lyra or to face the squalls herself. Instead, she reached into her pouch and gave the woman a small, polished shard of the starlight crystal, its edges smooth from a long journey. "This is not a tool of control," she said softly. "It is a companion for your song. It will help you remember that you are not shouting into the void. You are having a conversation." The stake was the village's future and the survival of its unique cultural practice, a demonstration that the world's oldest lore was not meant to replace local wisdom, but to rekindle its power from within. That evening, as the familiar, sickly green tinge painted the horizon and the first drops of cold rain began to fall, a new sound wove itself into the rising wind. It was Lyra's voice, hesitant at first, then growing in strength and clarity as she stood on the headland, the crystal shard held tightly in her palm. Her song was not a command, but a resonant, melodic plea that danced with the storm's own rhythm, and in response, the crystal began to glow with a soft, silver light, its beam cutting through the downpour to paint a gentle, guiding path on the churning water, a luminous road that led the frightened fishing boats safely back into the arms of the harbor. The city of Port Talon was a cacophony of shouting merchants and creaking cranes, a place where practicality was the only currency that mattered. A small hand tugged at Alara's cloak. She looked down to find a child with wide, earnest eyes, clutching a piece of parchment so crumpled it seemed to have been folded and unfolded 100 times. The drawing was a mess of wobbly lines and a lopsided sun, labeled in careful, unpracticed letters as Secret Island. Most would have offered a kind smile and moved on, but Alara knelt, taking the paper with the same reverence she would give a master chart. Her breath caught. Beneath the childish scrawl, the shape of the coastline was a clumsy but recognizable echo of the silent island, the place of the stone tower and the murmuring guardian. The child, whose name was Finn, explained in a rush how the island was hidden behind the morning mist and guarded by a friendly sea serpent with polka dots. The real conflict here was not with the sea, but with a world all too eager to dismiss such visions as mere fantasy. Alara made her choice. She would treat this map not as a drawing, but as a truth waiting to be discovered. "Come," she said, her voice quiet amid the port's din. "Let's go find your island." She led a bewildered Finn past the moored fishing boats to where her own small vessel, the Storyteller, was tied. They did not sail for days, only for an hour, just beyond the headland where the open sea began to breathe. The water was calm, the evening sky clear. Alara held up Finn's map against the horizon. "See," she said, pointing from the paper to the sky. "Your star here, the one you drew with the little tail, that is the same as that one, the mariner's lyre. It hangs just above the place where your secret island sleeps." Finn's eyes darted from the crayon star to the bright pinprick of light in the vast, darkening blue, a connection dawning that was more magical than any polka-dotted serpent. It was a validation that the world they dreamed of, and the world that truly existed, could be one and the same. The stake was not a physical danger, but the fragile future of a single imagination. By championing this crude map, Alara was defending the very source of all exploration, the brave, foolish, beautiful act of drawing a line into the unknown. She knew that if this spark was nurtured, it could one day grow into a light capable of guiding others through their own starlight Sargassos and Sky Wraths. As they turned back toward the glowing lamps of the port, Finn looked up at her, the map held securely now in both hands. "I am going to draw a new one tomorrow," the child declared, voice full of a newfound, unshakable purpose. And the day after that, too, Alara placed a hand on the child's shoulder, feeling the warm pulse of the crystal against her own chest. She did not need to look at her compass to know that the most important stories were now in the best possible hands, ensuring that the legacy of the Forgotten Seas would never truly be lost. The old captain of the Evening Star found her in a quiet harbor, his hands, once so sure on the wheel, now fidgeting with a coil of rope. Age had rounded his shoulders, but his eyes held the same sharp, restless intelligence Alara remembered. He did not greet her with small talk. "I dream of the water still," he confessed, his voice a low rumble, "but it is the dream of a man standing on the shore. My greatest regret is not the storms we faced, but the horizon we turned from. The choice to bring the ship home while you sailed on has haunted my quiet years." He saw not a legendary figure in her, but the young woman he had once doubted, then followed, and ultimately left behind. The internal conflict was a quiet storm of his own, a struggle with a life he felt was left incomplete, a story he had abandoned before its final chapter. Alara listened to his confession, this man who had once held her fate in his hands, and she understood that no tale of the Forgotten Seas could mend this particular wound. Words had brought him regret, so she would offer him silence. She extended a simple invitation for a single day's sail aboard the Storyteller. He accepted without hesitation, a flicker of his old command returning to his gaze. They did not speak of the past as the small ship slipped its moorings. Alara did not tell a single story. She simply let him take the wheel, his gnarled hands settling on the smooth, worn wood with a deep, familiar sigh. She let him feel the wind, not as a force to be battled, but as a companion. She let him watch the waves, not for hidden dangers, but for their simple, endless rhythm. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the creak of the hull and the cry of the gulls, a language older than any lore. In that shared, wordless experience, the old captain found what he had been searching for. It was not a grand adventure to reclaim, but a profound peace with the journey he had already made. The sea had not changed, but his relationship to it had. He saw it now not as a place of conquest, but as a teacher. The emotional stake was his reconciliation with his own legacy, a demonstration that the journey's impact was not measured in distance traveled, but in the wisdom carried home. As they turned back toward the harbor in the late afternoon light, he looked at Alara, his eyes clear for the first time. "You have given me more than a story," he said. "You have given me back my sea." Within a month, he had used his savings to open a small sailing school on the docks. Watching him teach his first class of wide-eyed children, his voice patient as he showed them how to tie a bowline, Alara felt a deep, quiet contentment. He was not chasing the horizon anymore. He was building a dock for others to launch from. Her work here was done. The unmarked compass in her pocket grew warm, its needle swinging away from the safe harbor and pointing steadfastly toward the open horizon once more. The storyteller groaned under a new kind of weight, its hold transformed from a solitary berth into a labyrinth of scrolls and carefully preserved artifacts. Alara and the scholar Alaric worked side by side, their partnership a quiet fusion of ink-stained academia and salt-weathered experience. They built not with silence, but with purpose, crafting shelves for the copied logbooks of the Dawn Chaser, and display cases for the Leviathan scale and the shards of Starlight crystal. The ship itself became the wandering library, its very timbers infused with the lore it carried, a mobile sanctuary of wonder that traveled not to hide its treasures, but to offer them freely to any who sought them. Alara's choice was a radical act of trust. She decided that the knowledge she had nearly sacrificed everything to obtain would not be hoarded or locked away in a single, distant institution. It would be a living resource, accessible to the fisherman's son, with a head full of stars, as easily as to the noble's daughter, with a heart tired of courtly manners. This democratization of the lore was her final, definitive answer to the solitude of her quest, transforming her personal burden into a shared inheritance. The conflict was no longer with mythical beasts or treacherous waters, but with the relentless, practical demands of preservation and passage. A sudden squall was no longer just a navigational hazard, but a threat to irreplaceable manuscripts. Dampness became an enemy, and the careful balancing of the ship's ballast against the weight of knowledge required a new kind of seamanship. Yet these challenges were imbued with a profound sense of purpose. Every repaired leak and secured crate a victory for the stories within. The stake was the widespread dissemination of wonder itself. The legacy of the forgotten seas now hinged on its ability to ignite a spark in the ordinary, to prove that magic was not a relic for the few, but a potential waiting in the many. As the library ship visited its first port, a long line of people formed on the dock, each waiting for their chance to step aboard and discover a piece of the magic for themselves. Years had woven threads of silver into Alara's hair and etched the memory of every horizon into the lines around her eyes. She stood at the helm of the wandering library, no longer just a woman, but a symbol in motion. The sea around her was no longer an empty expanse. It was alive with purpose, its surface dotted with the sails of countless other vessels. Each ship was a story she had helped to write, captained by the wide-eyed child from the port, the weary shipwright, the reclaimed storm singer, all exploring and charting their own unique versions of the forgotten seas. Her solitary quest had become a chorus, a renaissance of wonder that had reshaped the world's understanding of its own hidden corners. The only tension that remained was a quiet, profound responsibility, the gentle worry of a gardener watching a forest she planted grow beyond her direct touch. Would the stories stay true as they were retold by new voices? Would the respect for the old ways be passed down alongside the maps? She made her choice there, under the same stars that had first guided her. She would never anchor in a single port or build a static institution of stone. Her purpose was to remain a perpetual guide, a living reminder that the journey itself was the destination. To settle would be to become a monument, and monuments are visited, but they do not sail. The enduring quality of the legacy, now a living, breathing force with its own momentum, was the final and highest stake. Under a canopy of familiar, guiding constellations, she adjusted the wheel with a practiced hand. The unmarked compass in her pocket glowed with its soft, persistent warmth, its needle pointing not toward a place, but toward the next heart ready to listen, leading her ever onward into the endless, welcoming unknown. The Festival of Tides was a living tapestry, woven from the very stories Alara had spent a lifetime sharing. Ships of every design, from the humble fishing sloops of Shearwater to the elegant vessels of Ethelgard, crowded the sheltered bay. The air vibrated with shared laughter and the music of a dozen different cultures, a symphony of the community she had helped build. Yet within that harmony, a discordant note began to sound. A new faction had arrived, their ships sleek and fast, their purpose not celebration, but acquisition. Their leader, a man named Kalen, who had made a fortune trading in rare artifacts, stood before the assembled crowd and made his demand. He called the lore of the forgotten, seized the world's last great unclaimed resource. He argued that its wonders should be cataloged, patented, and sold to the highest bidder, with the Starlight crystal and the library ship serving as the foundation of his new enterprise. His words were not of malice, but of a cold, logical greed that threatened to turn shared wonder into private property. The festive atmosphere curdled into tension. Friends and allies Alara had known for years looked at one another with uncertainty, some swayed by the promise of wealth, others horrified by the proposition. The very spirit of the forgotten seas, a realm that answered to respect and not to force, hung in the balance. Alara felt the weight of the crystal against her chest, its light a frantic, anxious pulse. She knew she could not simply tell another story. She had to become one. Stepping forward, she closed her eyes and reached not for the crystal, but for the ocean of memory living within her. She let the dam break, channeling the entire legacy of the Constellation tree. She did not speak. A vision erupted from her, a shared dream that enveloped every person on the shore. They all felt it simultaneously, the chilling beauty of the starlight Sargasso, the profound peace of the Sea of Starlight, the ancient wisdom in the Leviathan's gaze. They were not observers. They were the sailor clinging to the rail in the Sky Wrath, the cartographer shivering in the Icewood grove, the child drawing a wobbly map full of hope. They felt the collective joy, the shared fear, the profound connection that was the true treasure of the lore. In that moment of shared experience, Kalen's argument for ownership crumbled into dust. You cannot own a memory that belongs to everyone. You cannot sell a feeling of wonder. As the vision reached its peak, Alara made her final choice. She understood that as long as the crystal existed as a physical object, it would remain a target, a prize to be fought over. True freedom for the stories meant releasing their anchor to this world. With a final, deep breath of surrender, she drew the crystal from its pouch and held it high. Instead of focusing its light, she willed it to release. A soft sigh seemed to pass through the crowd as the crystal dissolved in her hands, not shattering, but transforming into a million motes of pure, golden light. The shimmering particles rose into the evening air, dancing on the salt breeze before settling onto the waves and drifting up to join the emerging stars. The lore was no longer contained. It was in the water, in the sky, in the very air they breathed. It was forever free, a part of the world that could never be owned or controlled. The silence that followed was one of awe, not loss. Kalen and his followers simply turned, boarded their ships, and sailed away, their purpose rendered meaningless. Alara, now without her most powerful artifact, felt not empty, but complete. Her sacrifice was the final, definitive chapter of her story, proving that the greatest power lies not in holding on, but in letting go, ensuring that the magic of the forgotten seas would forever belong to every heart willing to believe. The deck of her ship felt different beneath her feet, not a platform for power, but a simple plank of wood riding the swells. With the crystal's light now woven into the fabric of the world, a profound and quiet peace settled over Ilara. She was no longer a vault, guarding a singular, precious flame. She was a gardener in a field where 1,000,000 new seeds had just been scattered by the wind. Her purpose had transformed from protection to participation, a single voice in a chorus that now spanned the oceans. The world itself felt different, its colors more vibrant, its horizons less forbidding, as if a layer of dust had been gently wiped from an ancient window. Communities that had once been isolated by their own fears now traded maps and melodies, their shared curiosity, a new kind of currency that enriched everyone it touched. Her own journey, which began with a single, trembling step onto a foreign deck, had rippled out to become a legacy of collective memory. She had started as a girl, chasing a ghost on a faded chart, and had become the first spark in an endless, self-sustaining chain of wonder. The stories of forgotten seas and celestial guardians were no longer fragile things to be preserved in silence. They were living, breathing narratives passed from one generation to the next, a gentle and enduring bedtime story whispered by the waves to all who would listen. While her own voyages would one day reach their final shore, the tales of ships, stars, and lost lore had their own eternal wind, ensuring they would sail on forever.
you.